You see this? This is what taking off a transmission twice and ruining 2 pilot bearings looks like. Not fun. Welcome to the nightclub, guys. It's your host, the Night Wrencher. Now today I'm bringing you this video. It was supposed to be a nice happy video about me installing the R150 back onto the LS and getting that all nice and sorted, but I did run into a couple issues. The first of my issues was you see that this is only half of my pilot bearing now because I had to cut it off. You can see the blue marks right there from where the pilot bearing was overheated and the pilot bearing actually blew up. This one was actually my fault from when I was installing the transmission. I'm pretty sure I cocked it all crooked and I destroyed it. After a while, it just ended up driving itself, and then if you can tell, the edge of this was partially touching the input shaft of the transmission. So I've got the input shaft right here. Let me wipe off the grease. You see this? This part right here is actually fine. The problem is right here. Now, full disclosure, I did use all Advanced Adapters parts, even though I sourced them from Summit. Everything came directly from Advanced Adapters. Customer service has been great. I've had no issues with them whatsoever. This is probably just something, Advanced Adapters doesn't advertise this as an LS swap kit. You kind of piece it together and figure it out on your own. There are a little bit of differences in like crankshaft design and things like that, and the Advanced Adapters does a really good job of pointing you in the right direction. That being said, there's almost, I don't want to be all, all encompassing, but there's almost no info of installing this transmission onto an LS. It took me forever to figure it out, and it wasn't until I talked to the reps that I was actually able to figure out what I needed. And so far, it worked 6 months flawlessly. I was towing with it, I was doing everything, and everything was perfect. Then I had an issue with the pilot bearing getting stuck. Then that was my fault. I ordered the new pilot bearing. I think it was like $35 shipped directly from Advanced Adapters, and then I installed that. And as soon as I installed it, I had issues everywhere. I couldn't shift anymore. It seems all the problems that I had before were even worse now. So that's a pretty big deal. This is the Advanced Adapters Bellhousing. I'm not going to go into part numbers or prices. I might be able to put them up on the screen, but this is the Advanced Adapters Bellhousing. It does come with this fork, and it comes with a different throwout bearing. This is the GM flat face, and normally it comes with a different one. But for the LS conversion, it came with this one, which is fine. The regular small block Chevy kit comes with this little bronze like bushing type thing. And you actually don't use that, you use the input shaft bearing on this. The clutch that you end up using is a McLeod clutch. It's more of a universal clutch, but the reason you need it is because your clutch disc, this is actually an R150 clutch disc, but it's bigger. It's bigger than the normal R150 clutch disc, and it's designed to sit and grab almost all of the clutch material entirely. If you use you can use the stock R150 clutch disc, but it's only going to end up like over here. So you're only going to grab about half of it, and you can use the stock flywheel as well for like a 6.0, but same thing. The flywheel only goes up to right here, and then you're only going to grab about this much of the disc. So you are going to need the aftermarket flywheel. You are going to need the aftermarket clutch disc. This clutch kit comes, I believe, I have to check, but I'm pretty sure most of this comes all together. So you don't really have to worry about that. Like I said, I'll put part number somewhere in the video. I went ahead and I replaced the rear main seal of the transmission. You do have to grab or buy a mini starter because your stock starter won't work on your LS conversion, so you are gonna have to buy a mini starter. That's like 250 bucks or whatever. And then you're gonna have your rear drive shaft modified. Well, I mean, if you're bolting this onto a Toyota truck, then you don't really have anything to worry about. Everything else will bolt on. If you are bolting this onto something that is not a Toyota truck, which I don't understand why you would, but I did. This is a Dodge. I did. So I went a little bit of extra more crazy, right? So this is a replacement pilot bearing, and this, as you can see, already has burn marks from when I welded it to take it off, and the pilot bearing in it is in kind of a rough shape, but it still works. So I was able to pull this back off. What happened was I installed the transmission. The transmission was bumping straight head on into here, as you saw the galling over there, and then I wasn't able to get it out of gear as soon as it was running. So that was the number one issue that I was having. So the guy at Advanced Adapters told me to have this turned down a bit. He didn't say how much. He said turn it down a bit and see if don't install it with the clutch, just install it with the pilot bearing and install the transmission, and make sure you're not getting any contact and you got a nice distance between your throttle bearing and your transmission. So if you're doing this at home, I recommend you doing that yourself. I have a lathe, so I was able to turn this down. I felt like I turned it down like 200 thousandths, but from the spec that he gave me and the spec that I measured on here, this measures in at 1.35, and the spec that he gave me is 1.47. So it sounds like I only turned it down 120 thousandths when I clearly remember going closer to 200, if not more. So this was probably an oversized bearing that I was given to on accident, and once I installed it, I had all these problems. So because originally on my original pilot bearing, I had no issues whatsoever until eventually I had issues with the pilot bearing. That was the original one was my fault. This one was not my fault. This one was just a little bit of an oversight. I'm not blaming it on anyone. Things happen. So then I went ahead and turned this down on both sides, because one side I had to weld on it to pull it out. The other side was all galled up. So I took off probably 200 thousandths, but it sounds like I'm only 120 under spec, which is about 100 and it's about an eighth of an inch. For anybody wanting to do this conversion, this is just kind of a buyer beware type situation. The combination does work. It will tow pretty much whatever you need it to tow. I've had no problems whatsoever with this transmission in terms of what its capacity is. I do have an issue with probably the output shaft, one of the bearings. It's making noise when on decel or coasting, but that's not related to the swap at all. This is probably in pre-existing condition of when I bought the transmission. One last thing, you see this hole right here? That hole was not there the day before yesterday. I had to make that hole in order to take my clutch off, because the pilot bearing was literally stuck onto here. So now I'm gonna have to rough this up, or sand this down a little bit, smooth, and see if I can get the pilot bearing in there, install everything, double check everything, make sure it's not contacting, and then away we go. So that about does it. For anybody have any questions, wanting to do LS swap their 4Runner Toyota pickup, go ahead and hit me up in the comments below. I will see you all in the next one. Night Wrencher out.